Here we are with the second Paintover image. So this is the same kind of scene, but more low angle, more at the view of the kind of where the player character would be if they're coming up on a boat and then seeing the city. I think it would be cool to also show it from this angle. And here I'm going through kind of my typical how I would render image out in Blender, and then I render out a mist pass, and then using the camera, which I'll show in a later on video in the kind of Blender tips and tricks and rendering section, how I render out different kind of like depths of the image, because I like to separate the image into foreground, midground, background, and then potentially even different foreground. Like this image probably has one foreground and then like 5 different midgrounds that I separate into, and then like a few different background layers. And this is so that I can very easily, because there's a lot of complex elements, I don't want to be lassoing this by hand. So there's a lot of elements that I want Blender to take care of with rendering, so I can just easily put mist and stuff behind it. So this first few, like this first section is literally just organizing the file so I can start working on it. Again, I'm starting with the sky here. I'm going to be moving from background to foreground. This is a pretty common thing I learned from matte painting, and matte painting kind of like teachers. Kind of move from, if you move from background to foreground, then you kind of, the sky and background will always kind of like set the mood for the image. So you don't have to worry about like working on your foreground and midground and then you're still like not sure what the mood is. So you'll kind of just set it very early on. And I know I'm going to do a lot of like color correcting and color post correcting on top too, so I'm not worrying too much about that. I'm just getting the general vibe, and then there's gonna be a lot of mist in this image. There's a lot of dense elements, so to help the image read, it's gonna need a lot of like atmospheric elements to help with separation. These are some cloud images that they're like cloud PNGs. I think I got them from Photo Bash. I'll use them sometimes, but for this stuff, I love using them. Oftentimes, I'll just paint the atmosphere using just one of the cloud brushes that I've got. These are like super common. You can get them from like Shadi, Safadi. He's got his brush set. Pretty much anyone that's giving out a brush set has these cloud brushes. They're pretty just good for generating kind of noisy cloud images. And so what I'm thinking right now is that the focal point is going to be kind of in the middle of this image. It's kind of going to be that kind of middle building to kind of give the image a focal. And so I'm going to need ways to kind of create separation and depth around that building. So atmosphere and light is how I'm going to do it. as I work on this image, certain elements are going to change a bit. So for instance, the crane, I ended up taking out that crane. I'm working on these flags here, but as you see in the final, I end up taking out the flags. It's kind of to help consolidate color, and they were kind of drawing a little bit too much attention, so I didn't really need those there for the final. So as you work on the image, think about what you need for the, what if it doesn't help the image, then just take it out. Even if it's like a cool element, just feel free to take it out. A lot of times it's all about editing. Editing is a really big part. So try not to fall in love with any parts of your image, because you might fall in love with an aspect of your image, and after working on it, you could work on it for like hours, but if it's not helping the image, it's going to hurt the image in the long term. So I'm working on these flags, but eventually I'll take them out. For the background, just simplifying that shape. It doesn't need to have so many like little squiggles to it. It'll just be a very simple shape and kind of silhouetted. So I'm going to be silhouetting some of the more background things, just taking out details since we don't need to draw too much attention there. Around this point, I'm looking at the focal. It looks like it needs more separation, it needs more atmosphere, it needs to kind of pop out from what's behind it. So just adding extra heavy atmosphere. And I'm constantly turning the image black and white because the value read is just so important. Colors can be edited later. They're much easier to edit, I feel like, than a big value change. Because value is just like a very structural part of the image, so getting the values early on done is better. And so like the silhouette of the main building wasn't as powerful as it could be, so I wanted to just make it a little bit more complex since it's kind of the main read. So here I added on the rooftop, I added kind of like a wood structure with like flags. This will just help the silhouette kind of stand out a bit more. There's kind of a lot of details in this image, so trying to figure out how to balance it, how to like essentially like, it's essentially working backwards than traditional painting, because traditional painting you slowly build up details, and then when you're working from like a render like this, you're actually like figuring out how to actually like simplify things and get rid of details and keep them in the areas you want. So it's actually pretty interesting for those who are familiar with like more traditional painting, drawing and painting. And then I'm kind of like experimenting with different things in the back. I'm thinking maybe the atmospheres, I was wondering that the back building or the back mountain with all the structures on it, it might have been making the scene too busy. So here I'm like testing out, like what if we just fog it out? It's like so foggy we can't see it. And then I'll really focus on the middle building, but I was like, no, this is, I want to keep it. It's a big part of the image. It actually, I revisited it I think the next day after I was painting it, and I was like, no, I want to bring it back. And then a little bit of value adjustment on the top to crisp it up a little bit, just push contrast the values a bit more, and then it kind of pops out. And then here we're kind of like we're already past the midpoint. We're kind of going to start fine-tuning some shapes, colors, and atmosphere. And I'm doing a lot of manual painting here because the render is really good, but oftentimes you need to fill in certain details. So here I'm going to be like, I'm painting a lot of highlights, bounce lights. That's a lot of the stuff that I'm painting. And also just like simplifying certain things that the render didn't do to kind of what I think it could be for the final image. So always be willing to paint on top of your work. Painting will just help things read. Make sure that the bounce lights read and highlights read. It'll help draw focus, it'll help with separation and like layering. And here you can see I kind of did another render where I took the flags off and then posted it on. I felt like the flags were drawing too much attention with their shape and with the color of the flags. The color palette was just a little bit too varied for the look that I was going for this. So the reds of those flags are kind of just taking away a lot. And then here I'm just doing more painting. The robes are kind of maybe drawing too much attention, fixing certain things. Certain highlights that draw too much attention you can kind of tone down. Give things like a little bit of a gradient if you want to. It helps it feel more dynamic. And then highlights. I love painting highlights and bounce light. And then what I did here actually was I swapped out some of the characters to feel more like, and gave them more like Japanese style costumes. So this would just kind of help fit the scene a bit more. And so actually doing costume design and character design could take a lot of work. And so what I ended up doing is that instead of like modeling all these costumes, I just bought a few costumes off the Daz store. And then so you just could easily kind of like export that, send it into Mixamo. I use Mixamo a lot for posing characters too. So I brought them into Mixamo, then I could pose them in a whole bunch of poses, and then I could kind of just use them in the scene. Otherwise, like if you're gonna create your own characters, it just takes a lot of time. And since this piece isn't about the characters, it's about the environment, I don't mind kind of doing something that like it feels a bit more generic. From this point on, it's a lot of fine-tuning most of the main shapes and atmospheres there. It's just kind of like tuning the shape, tuning how much or how little, atmosphere and separation is there? Where can I use more separation? Like if there's a spot that just feels too dense with darkness or with light, can I like separate it? Can I change it? And then this stage is where more hand painting can come in to kind of like emphasize and simplify shapes. Make sure like with just a quick read what is in front of, how do you know what's in front of the other thing? And light, shadow, highlights are a good way to do that. Just more fine-tuning elements. Fine-tuning elements with light and shadow and atmosphere. Make sure the layering works. This boat had just an issue with it earlier, so I'm just kind of like separating it out, making sure it reads properly with the atmosphere and value. And a big reason why I can kind of fade out some of those background buildings so you barely see them is that they're not what this image is about. When I've told other people, like people I've worked with, or other people who are still looking for advice and they're more looking for advice in composition, is that you have to kind of choose a direction of what your piece is about. Like right now, the piece is about the middle part, so everything else has to support that. So I can just, it's okay if I kind of completely tone down or almost like fog out a building that's in the background, because it's not about that building. It's not about that shape. It always has to be about something specific. And if you don't make it about something specific, then the piece can have multiple focal points and might not read as clear as it should. And then just for some color balance type work, I'll do select color. Select color is really good on the white, gray, and black, where you can kind of just like change value, change color. It's really great. Select color, color lookup, and color balance are some of my most go-to for color tweaking. As well as you can kind of copy merge your scene, turn it into a smart object, and then run a camera raw filter on it. And then that will actually keep your smart object data as well. So you can copy that data onto new merged images as much as you want, essentially. And then also go back into the data to re-edit it. And then here, the stilts under the buildings, they were kind of like, they were looking cool, but they had just a lot of kind of like vertical shapes, a lot of dark shapes. There wasn't as much separation as there could be. So here I'm just kind of like making selections and just painting an atmosphere. This will kind of like reduce the build up. It'll kind of give atmosphere. And certain areas were getting too dense. And it kind of felt too flat. I was feeling flat simply because there wasn't that depth. And then a little bit more rim lights, especially near where like the light source is. Rim lights and highlights. Some more final painting stuff here at the end. Especially there's going to be some like artifacts from the render, so like that's also really great stuff just to kind of like paint in. So here I'm even going into the wood boards because they're pretty close to camera. You can just kind of give them a little bit more personality, a little bit more uniqueness, since it's kind of close to the camera. And from a render, it could just seem a little bit flat and raw. And then also the focal point can use a little bit more work and care. And then I'm kind of like finding areas that should have separation, but maybe aren't feeling separated enough. So just like a little bit of hand painting here. Kind of like if something's feeling too flat, maybe because it's one value, so I'm kind of maybe adding an extra value step, lighter or darker, and it just kind of gives it that slight bit more depth. And then with those kind of values under in the docks pushed back, kind of reads a bit cleaner there. Yep, even the rope needs its own like subtle highlights. And this is why it's important to also stay pretty organized with your layers, since there's going to be a lot of things in front and behind. This piece got kind of intense since there were a lot of re-rendering of areas, but the fact that I tried to stay as clean as possible to layer management meant that it's okay. And then this is kind of how I end up finishing all my pieces. I'm essentially finished with 95%, and the last like 5 to 10% let's say, are doing these like final detail work. It's like detail work, it's painting out areas, highlights, bounce light, making sure things are separated, what's in front feels like it's more in front, with just these subtle things. So these are just the finishing touches to this image. These are just so fun to do, this image and then the first image. If you haven't, check out the sketches I did for this. There's a whole section covering reference. Pure Ref is amazing. Check out the 3D build. First built a kit bash library and then started building out pieces with it and then setting the scene together. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Check out the Blender tips, tricks, and render section if you haven't. Really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I had a ton of fun making it. You can follow me for more stuff on Instagram at KevinJigArt, on my art station, KevinJig, and then also I hope to make more future videos in the future, either on YouTube or more tutorials. So thanks so much for checking this out, and have a great one.